Hi everyone, and welcome back for episode 2 in our Who HQ book club of Who Was King Tut. I am Beth from the West Allis Public Library, and today we are starting with chapter 3, The Boy King. Still, growing up in ancient Egypt was full of pleasures, especially if somebody belonged to the royal family. Tut was born a prince. He spent his childhood in a brand new palace in Amarna. Egyptian palaces were huge. All over the palace grounds were beautiful gardens and giant pools, the size of lakes. Palace buildings were made of brick and covered in white plaster. The walls were covered with colorful paintings. There were separate buildings for the pharaoh's wives. Servants would have seen to all of Tut's needs. Each day they brought his food. Peasants ate bread and drank beer. But for a royal prince, there were meat and vegetables, figs and dates. Wine was made from grapes grown in northern Egypt, or from dates or figs or pomegranates. It appears that young Tut was a member of the Clean Plate Club. A small statue of him reveals a chubby child with a plump belly and arms. His servants also bathed and dressed him. They shaved his head, leaving only a braid of hair at the side. This was the hairstyle for a prince. While he slept, they fanned him with ostrich plume fans. That way the heat would not disturb him. So do any of you, when it gets really hot, sleep with a fan on in your room? An electric fan? Maybe one on the ceiling, maybe one that goes side to side. So Tut had a person with ostrich feathers fanning him. That's crazy. Sorry, okay. Crocodiles lived in the Nile River, so guards kept watch every time Tut went swimming. Once he got older, he could ride his own chariot drawn by 2 fine horses with plumed headdresses. Or he could sit back and enjoy a boat trip on the Nile. Tut took his bow and arrow and went hunting with his hounds. In the desert, he might shoot an ostrich. Near the river, there were ducks to hunt. Evidently, Tut liked playing a popular board game called Senet. He made sure 4 sets were put in his tomb. Did he like to play music? Perhaps so. Trumpets were found in his tomb. If he didn't want to play himself, musicians would play for him. They would play the harp and the lute and pipe. Because of the heat, even princes and princesses wore light, simple clothing. Paintings of Tutankhamun show him in a pleated kilt of white linen. His clothes were simple, but his jewelry was not. He wore heavy gold bracelets and rings. Some necklaces of beads and gold were so large that they covered his chest. His wife wore lots of heavy, beautiful jewelry. So did other royal children. Young boys wore heavy earrings. 2 pairs of tuts were placed in his tomb. Ancient Egypt was the first place to develop a written language. Boys learned to read and write, starting at 4 years old. Did Tut know how? Probably. Writing materials were put inside his tomb. A beautiful brush case belonging to Tut was made from wood covered in gold foil with gemstones. If Tut didn't feel like doing his own writing, he could have a scribe do it for him. A scribe's job was to write down all the pharaoh's orders and letters for him. The Egyptians didn't have pens or pencils. Instead, they took a reed and chewed on the end of it. When the tip split apart, it could be used as a brush. Black ink was made from soot or charcoal. It came in a small round block. A student had to dip the brush in a water pot before rubbing it on the ink. Egyptians made a kind of heavy paper from papyrus plants along the banks of the Nile. Our word for paper comes from papyrus. The stem of the plant was cut into long strips. The strips were then placed in 2 layers crossways and pounded with a hammer. When all the juice was pounded out, the 2 layers formed a single sheet. That was put under a heavy stone until it dried out even more and became flatter. The last step was to rub the papyrus sheet back and forth with a stone until it was smooth. Instead of binding sheets of papyrus into books, the sheets were rolled up into scrolls. Papyrus paper was very strong. Some scrolls have been found that are thousands of years old. They are still in good shape. Papyrus was also easy to erase. A dab of water was all that was needed to get rid of a mistake. As a child, Tut probably made lots of mistakes learning to write. Our alphabet, so ours, only has 26 letters. His had about 1,000 different symbols called hieroglyphs. Many hieroglyphs looked more like pictures than letters. After the ancient empire of Egypt came to an end, the meaning of hieroglyphs was lost for many centuries. No one could translate the writing. It was like a secret code that could not be broken. Then, in 1822, a Frenchman named Jean-Francois Champollion finally figured out how to decipher or translate hieroglyphs. Many of the objects in King Tut's tomb are inscribed with the pharaoh's name in hieroglyphs. It looked like this. So this is his name, and then these are some other hieroglyphs. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna do a quick blurb about the Rosetta Stone. If it weren't for a lucky accident, the meaning of hieroglyphs might still be a mystery. In 1799, French soldiers found a large piece of black stone called basalt. The stone had carvings in 3 different scripts: hieroglyphs, Greek, and a third called Demotic. Demotic? The words on the stone were written in 196 BC to praise a pharaoh named Ptolemy. Ptolemy the Fifth. Ptolemy the Fifth. All 3 languages were commonly used at the time so that whoever saw the stone could read it. By the 1800s, no one knew how to read hieroglyphs. But if someone could match up the Greek and the Demotic to the hieroglyphs, they could create a key to hieroglyphs. Jean-Francois Champollion finally figured out the basic rules of hieroglyphs after studying the stone for 14 years. Finally, after almost 1,500 years of silence, the language of ancient Egypt could at last be heard. The stone is called the Rosetta Stone, after the town where it was found. Today, it is in the British Museum in London. There's also, you may have heard of it, there's, I think it's a computer program that teaches you other languages, and it's called Rosetta Stone, I think. So, you may have heard it there too. Okay, chapter 4, an early death. During Amenhotep's 16-year-long rule, the empire did not run smoothly, so that was Tut's father. The lands under Egypt's control had to pay tribute. This meant that every year they had to send riches to the pharaoh. For instance, from Nubia in the south came gold. Lebanon had to send rare cedar wood, but the Egyptian army had grown weaker. Tribute had stopped coming in. Then Amenhotep IV was gone, and King Tut was just a child. How could he be expected to make the empire strong again? The real power now lay with Tut's vizier, or chief minister, one of the army generals. Tut was the ruler in name only. He appeared at important ceremonies and holidays. If Tut had lived beyond his teen years, perhaps he would have grown up to become a strong and wise ruler. Or maybe he would have always been under the thumb of his advisors. Perhaps they were afraid that if Tut had more power, he might try to bring back the strange ways of Amenhotep IV. Instead, the temples of the older gods were reopened, and Thebes, not Amarna, became the royal city once again. Tut moved back there with his queen. They may have had children. In Tut's tomb, along with his coffin, 2 tiny coffins were also found. They contained the bodies of 2 baby girls. It's possible that they were Tut's children. What we do know is this: he didn't leave a son behind to become pharaoh after his death. And even in a time when most people did not live to age 40, Tut still died very young. He was only 18 or 19. It is not surprising that some historians have suspected foul play. Perhaps the vizier or general decided to get rid of Tut. Each of them became pharaoh after Tut by marrying into the royal family. In modern times, a popular notion was that Tut died from a blow to the head. But in 2005, CAT scans were done on the pharaoh's 3,000-year-old body. Over 2 months, cross-sectional images were taken of Tut from head to toe. Think of Tut's body as a loaf of bread, with each image being a slice of bread. So they just did pictures, almost like x-rays. That's what a CAT scan is. They kind of put you in a tube and they do like a kind of an x-ray of your whole body. When all the images were assembled, they created a 3-dimensional picture of his body, inside and out. So what did scientists learn? There appeared to be an injury to his head, but it did not happen when he was alive. Tut's skull may have been injured when his mummy was found in 1922, so he was not killed by a blow to the head. However, the tests were not able to rule out all other methods of murder. For example, there was no way to tell if Tut had been poisoned. Evidence of poison wouldn't have shown up on the scans. The scientists did find out that Tut had a broken leg. It is possible that this injury may have caused an infection that led to his death. The tests on Tut are over now. His body probably does not need to be examined anymore. The man who headed the testing said, "We should leave him in peace." Tut was placed in his coffin and returned to his burial chamber. So that is where we will stop now. We pick up tomorrow with Chapter 5, The Afterlife. So this has been episode 2 of our Who HQ book club from the West Dallas Public Library. We are reading Who Was King Tut. Bye, everyone.